Hey, algebra kiddos, this is Miss Stefan this week. I'm going to start these lesson 6.1 notes with you guys. We're going to go through quadratic formula, which is another step after discriminant. So quick review from week 5. When we start with a discriminant, we always want our equation to be equal to 0. Remember, on the axis, we're looking for intercepts right here on the x-axis, so we always want y to be 0 or the equation to be 0. The first case we looked at last week is when d was less than 0 or negative. And when that happens, that means there are no real solutions. So an example might be when your graph is completely above the x-axis or maybe completely below the x-axis. It never crosses. The second example we looked at from last week, when d equal to 0, that means there is one real solution, or the graph touches right on the x-axis one time, the vertex. Again, it could be above or below. And the third example that we looked at last week is when d equaled 0, was greater than 0, then it was positive. And when that happened, there are two real solutions. And so that's more of our standard quadratic where it crosses twice on the x-axis. So now that you have practiced the discriminant for a whole week, remember that's the part underneath the radical, now we're going to add the additional step of plugging in the materials in the quadratic formula. So let's first start with determining the discriminant. You should be really good at this from last week. So looking at this equation, I can't start until I move the 6 over. So let me do that first. And the 6 is a whole number, so I'm going to combine that with the 7, and I'm going to get 1. So that allows me to see that my A value is 1, my B value is 2, and my C value is 1. So now when I go to find the discriminant, I'm going to do B squared minus 4 times A times C. And I put everything in parentheses to help me with my units. So 2 squared comes out to 4. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. And then 4 minus 4 is 0. So I'm going to look back up at my notes real quick. If d equals 0, then there's one real solution. So I'll make myself a note. And this is important because this tells me I have to continue on to the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula actually tells you, hey, the solution for x is all of this stuff. So what's new in the quadratic formula, the discriminant goes under the square root. You are already familiar with that. But what we haven't done yet is this b in front and this a on bottom. So I've already written it out for you. So we're going to plug in b in the first parentheses. We're going to plug in our discriminant value underneath the radical. And we're going to plug in our a on the bottom. And guess what? You're done. So that's all we're doing this week is plugging in the b, the d, and the a. Once we know there are solutions and it's needed. All right, let's try another example. I see 6x squared minus 9 equals 8x. That's not what I want to start with. So I'm going to move the 8x over. There's nothing to combine the 8x with, so I'm going to leave it all separated. But now I have an a value of 6. I have a b value of negative 8. And I have a c value of negative 9. So I can go on to my discriminant. B squared minus 4ac. All right, so this one I'm going to need my calculator on. I know negative 8 times a negative 8 gives me 64. So let me punch in real quick. Negative 4 times 6 times negative 9, and I got positive 216. So I add that to 64 and I get 280. So now that's a positive. If you don't remember, look back at the top. Positive tells me there's two real solutions. So I'm going to put a note, 2 real solutions. And again, that's just to remind me that I need to continue on to the quadratic formula. So quadratic formula says x equals opposite b plus or minus the square root all over 2 times a. So now let's plug in our b, negative 8. Let's plug in our discriminant, 280. And let's plug in our a value, 6. Guess what? You're done. Okay. All right, last example I want to work with you guys. X squared equals -6. Not how we want to start. So let's move that over. And I have x squared plus 6. Now this does not look like my normal quadratic, does it? It only has 2 parts. So I want to make myself a note, hey, there are no x's hanging out there in the middle. So make sure you understand that's a 0. So my a value is a 1, my b value is a 0, and my c value is a 6. So for discriminant, b squared minus 4 times a times c. And again, use your calculator if you need to. That's 0. -4 times 1 times 6 is -24. So my discriminant here is -24. Again, if you can't remember, go back up to my little cheat sheet up here. If the discriminant is negative, then there are no real solutions. So let's write our note here. Hey, there are no real solutions. And guess what? If there are no real solutions, you do not have to do the quadratic formula. There's no answers. So you can just stop right there. Okay, guys, so I want you to try some of these practice ones on your own. I was pretty nice. I filled out some of the formulas there so you can kind of expedite your process, but I want you to get the hang of it. Do all the discriminants that are needed and then determine what solutions you need. Okay, if you need any help, reach out to your teacher and be on the lookout for a practice video later this week. Have a great week.